Hello, my name is Heath Jones. If you're watching this, you probably know that I'm the pastor at Northwood Christian Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. But just in case you don't, you might want to check out our website at www.indyncc.org. That's www.indncc.org. But for now, we're going to consider a passage that is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, and we'll be going over verses 1 through 10. And it goes, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." The Bible is rich with metaphors meant to describe what it is like to enter into the realm of God, or as is more often known, the kingdom of God, to fall deeper into a life that is patterned after God's ways for us, an ordered life, a life that leads to fulfillment and richness of life and a greater love. And this parable is no exception, filled with metaphors meant to describe this reality. And there's one very common one that you may notice from the onset, the metaphor of sheep and shepherd, meant to describe the nature of God's love and care for us. Many hymns written about it, other passages in the Bible where this metaphor is used. The shepherd-sheep metaphor, it's meant to teach us about the intimate ways in which God gathers us, knows us, and leads us to peaceful places. In today's parable, the shepherd knows us by name. Intimacy. And Jesus, as shepherd, knows our patterns and what we need to thrive. So the good shepherd calls us to a place where we can live well. And the sheep respond to this voice, a voice that we've come to trust in time. And then there's the next metaphor that I notice, and it's that of voice. Hearing the voice of the shepherd in this case. And then we respond to the voice. And, in a world that is very loud with the voices of other things, disciples of Jesus can still pick out the voice of Christ in the din, the clamor. Perhaps you've heard it at church, or perhaps you've caught whispers of it by way of the loving actions of another. Different ways of hearing the voice of Christ through others, or through the scriptures, or in song, or in nature. Either way, when you hear it, you want to lean into it, to gravitate towards the people, the places, or the stories that remind you of the voice of God. Those that hear this voice are like sheep who know the shepherd's voice. It can be subtle and sometimes loud, but we are here in this space because I'm guessing we each in our own way have heard the call of Jesus through the competing noise of our time. And this voice calls us to a richer life and a greater love. And I like this a lot. But one metaphor that grabs me, in addition to these others, is gate or gatekeeper, guarding the life inside the fold. And I should pause to note how this metaphor, this describing Jesus as a gatekeeper, it's been weaponized over the years. I should say that up front. This gate metaphor has been described by preachers as a very narrow slit in a wall meant to keep people on the other side of heaven. In fact, to keep people in the place that judgmental people have assumed that they belong. Some have called it hell. And the gatekeeper's function has been described as more of a bouncer, a cosmic bouncer, keeping people outside of the God Club, a club whose membership is the elect who pride themselves at having arrived at that place. All this to say, I can understand why a preacher would like to focus on the universality of God's love and shy away from a text like this. But it's my hope in the coming moments that I might reframe things for you so that you can come to better understand what this text is really about. Its real goal is to help us follow God's call towards a life-giving way, a way that excludes no one and leaves no one out. In other words, hint, hint, the gate is wide open, and therefore us all. But what is this life-giving way that Jesus describes? I'd like to take a few moments to spend on that question. In John's gospel, just sticking with the gospel we're reading today, the way Jesus shows us is a way anchored in God's love. Read John 3:16. It's a way anchored in the truth. In John chapter 8, we read how the truth will set us free. So radical truth-telling. It's a way that's also anchored in grace. In John chapter 8, we can read about the woman who's caught in adultery and receives grace. And grace for us all is the point. This is a way that leads to the restoration of persons who were otherwise left outside of life-giving community. Think in the Bible terms, tax collectors, lepers, sinners, and any others who are thought to be unclean or outside of God's love or unaccepted. So to summarize, the way of Jesus, the way that the shepherd Jesus wants to lead us is a way to greater love. Love for one another, God's creation, and everything. Top-down love for us all and everything. The shepherd Jesus wants to lead us to a greater truth about ourselves in all of our flaws, and about what is most important, and the truth about those who commit injustices, all of it, radical truth-telling. The shepherd Jesus wants to lead us down paths of grace, where we find ourselves accepted, warts and all. And lastly, the shepherd Jesus leads us to a place where outcasts find their place in the world. All of this to say, in this brief summary of the way and what Jesus is describing, the place he's leading us to, the place Jesus wants to lead us is the sort of place where a loving community is possible. Possible because the ways that lead to death and division have been rejected in light of a better way, in response to a purer voice. So Jesus, in various ways, taught us about this way, and he, in fact, embodied this way. He carried it in his person, in his actions, in his words. He instructed others on how to love and on how to care for one another, and he modeled that love and care for us to see. He showed his followers what it looks like to forgive one's enemies and to advocate for the dignity of all persons. This is the way that Jesus described in contrast with the other ways that were being practiced all around them, his disciples, himself. And the gate we are instructed to walk through is the door that leads to health and well-being. It's the path to a community that is built around the values of Jesus over and against the status quo. As to the status quo, I've spoken on this many times before, but here's a brief description about what the status quo was in Jesus' day. You probably know. Rome ruled the roost, meaning Israel was an occupied colony of Rome. The people were highly taxed into deep poverty. The Roman army kept the people in line by violent means, sometimes putting down insurrections and treating the people poorly. So the people are very oppressed, to put it mildly, and Rome seemed to hold as its values peace for Romans, but at the expense of others. Wealth for Rome, but on the backs of others. And some people made off very well if they were able to collude with Rome in the pillaging. But most were left outside of the wealth with no access to the resources they needed to not only live well, but in some cases to live at all. And also, along with the Roman system came an imperial theology, a civic religion, if you will, where Caesar was named as, get this, the Son of God. The emperor was seen as divine, and the power of Rome was a gift of the heavens. God wants it this way, in short. God wants Rome on top. And Caesar's image, as the embodiment of Rome, was printed on the currency, an ancient rendering of the idea, in Caesar we trust. So to summarize, what you have is the values of an empire built by greed on the backs of the poor and surrounding nations. And you have an empire that sustains its existence by way of perpetual war and looting. They were always going out to conquer more spaces or to subdue places they'd already conquered. You not only have greed and violence, but the greed and violence is sanctioned by a nationalist religion, a nationalist cult that gives the practices of Rome a divine sanction. People were required to make sacrifices to the cult of the emperor on a yearly basis. In that day's version of paying homage to national identity and its symbols, well, that's what this was. Sacrifices to the Caesar as a way of saluting whatever national symbol they cohere around. So Rome's voice was the loudest and the most persistent in the context into which Jesus said these words. These words basically summarized as, there is another way. Tune out the voice of Rome. There is another way. There is a way marked by peace, love, justice, grace, and truth-telling. And you know those thieves who are trying to arrive at heaven by violence and pillaging, who are trying to set themselves up, well, they are like thieves trying to climb the fence and enter into a peace, a joy, and a love that can only be entered into by following my way, says Jesus, by rejecting the death-dealing ways of empire. So Jesus is speaking into a world of loud voices to those whose ears are especially tuned to hear what he has to say. And those who hear it follow. And then we enter into the joy of God who called us into existence. God gives us a name and knows us intimately. In Jesus' time, this meant that the disciples should stop listening to the voice of Rome. And it's hard. It's a loud voice in Jesus' time. But Jesus wants them to stop listening to the voices of the false gods, of greed and of oppression, and to start listening to the voice that calls them towards life-giving ways. And this, of course, upset powerful people of Jesus' day so much that they killed him. This is why they killed him. And many others have died through the centuries along this way. But those of us who hear the call of the shepherd continue to follow. And this is true today. We can still hear the voice and enter into the gate that leads to a better place. But I emphasize this, the door is wide open. But there are many voices trying to command our attention even today. In Jesus' time, the dominant voice was Rome's. In our consumer culture, we are told that our identity is tied up in our vocations, our ability to accrue wealth. Our worth is found in our titles and in our national identity. Turn on the television. You'll hear the dominant voices of our time, loud and perhaps so loud you can hear nothing else sometimes. It's like we're asked to wear so many name tags, mass-produced, meant to give our identity up and to receive the identity that our culture gives us. And we are told that if we play the game, we will find our way inside the fence. And inside the fence, we are told we will be secure, safe, fed, cared for. And that the safety is made possible by way of military force today. And that our wealth is made possible by rampant consumption, but also an exploited and underpaid workforce. And if you just pluck away at things long enough, you will be safe inside the fence, we are told, and the gate. Well, we keep thinking that we can make our own way into the place that we want to be. In the meantime, look around you. Have these promises made by our consumer culture borne out? Have they been found to be true? The truth is supposed to set us free. Are we free? In an age of mass incarceration, deeper pockets of poverty, a more vulnerable middle class, which is ever shrinking, and all of this, truth became more true, more stark, more noticeable after this pandemic, or in the context of this pandemic that we are still in, where the fragility of our systems have been laid bare. And I think that we are seeing what it looks like in real time. The truth that Jesus spoke, that there are no shortcuts to peace. We cannot will a better gate into existence. Before we arrive at peace, we'll need to reject the allures of wealth and consumerism and all other idols that our cultures create. You cannot, by way of robbery or thievery, enter into the peace of God. You must enter by the way Jesus described, which, I'll remind you, is a way of love, grace, peace. One that strives to restore all persons, or include all persons, into life-giving communion with one another. And this way is only made possible by way of love and hard truth-telling, which is what we should always be trying to do. So whose voice will you hear in these trying times? The voices that have led us again and again to tenuous, stressful living? The greedy voices that brought you mass layoffs? The whole while turning your heart into a consumer's heart? Are we going to listen to the voices that sanction torture and black sites all over the globe and drone strikes on civilians, all in the name of peace? Have the promises made us in our time by our culture been found to be true? Decades and decades later, have the promises been found to be true? The promises made by this consumer culture. I think that they are, in the words of Jesus, like thieves who seek to kill and destroy. Listen. Hear the voice competing with the loud, blithering voices of our times. Jesus calling you home. His way led to a cross, but in so doing, he confronted the death-dealing ways of our world and revealed that life wins in the end, again and again and again. And if you believe this to be true, listen to his voice, calling us towards a love that transcends borders, nationalities, races, language, a voice that calls us away from greed and rampant consumerism and the priorities of a consumer culture, and towards abundance on the other side of radical generosity. There is a gate, a path, a door to these things, and Jesus is the embodiment of these things. Will you hear his voice and tune out the loud mouths on your television or in print media or in certain high political offices? Instead, hear the one who said, "Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly." It's time for persons of all walks of life to hear this call and to follow it to the life it leads us to. And God is faithful and will make good on the promises to lead us to this place. Jesus is the way for us, and his ways and his values will become the blueprint for how we are to live well with one another. And those who hear the call will follow, and he is the gate. But this is not a door that excludes, but rather welcomes us all into a better way, a better perspective. So, enter into the fold, but use the gate, no shortcuts. Or as Jesus once said, we cannot serve both God and money, or God and any other thing that conflicts with God's values. But the gate is always open. God is calling humanity to a better way. It's time for us to hear the voice and to enter into the life humanity was meant to live.